give you a microphone.
Support, moral support.
Thank you. Check 1, 2. Hello everyone, I hope you're all as baked as I am. Happy MardiGrass. Coppers staked out all around the bloody town. I had to set my alarm this morning for 4:20. True. I get up on the main road at dawn. Why? Because I'm a cannabis user. I want to preface this little conversation, which is, I'm not going to provide any great pearls of wisdom in this. I just want to start this weekend with a consideration of in plain speak, the current laws in Australia, the impact of those laws on cannabis users, and then how this can inform and should inform the way that our representatives, the politicians and activists around the place are approaching the job of cannabis law reform. Because oddly enough, we talk about cannabis law reform a lot, but we all seem to be often meaning very different things. Certainly when politicians talk about cannabis law reform, they seem to be talking in incremental terms that have nothing to do with the promises they make before they're elected. To give you a direct illustration of what I mean, Biden in the US went into the election with ads all over the telly. Was a bit lost in the Trump brouhaha, but he declared that he was going to decriminalise cannabis at the federal level. Move on 3 years, he won. He's had full reign there. And what has happened? Absolutely fuck all. Even the propositions that they're working with, they've decided it's enough to provide retrospective reprieve to wipe particular sentences for thousands of people who aren't in jail. Wow, they're moving cannabis in the US from a Schedule 1. They're going to spend millions of dollars in panels all over the place to consider moving it to a Schedule 3, which equates cannabis with anabolic steroids and ketamine. It's fucking ridiculous. We have to start.
It's ridiculous.
We have to start this conversation grounded in reality, not in the plethora of bullshit that has been talked constantly about cannabis. Last night I saw on the ABC Mr. Sabaf, who is an advisor to Mr. Biden. He was a fat, middle-aged fellow in a suit who was talking knowledgeably on cannabis and how dangerous it was, and I doubt he's ever seen a fucking joint. I mean, these are the people who are dictating to us how we need to live our lives. That we have to have this plethora of police and civil infringement authorities all around us to protect us from cannabis. Now, this is in a world where, of course, when you go into any of the major cities, it's obvious there's derelict cannabis addicts all along the gutters who need fucking shelter paid for by the government. Oh no, I'm sorry, that's perfectly legal drugs. We all know cannabis doesn't harm you. Yes, there are detrimental effects. There are detrimental effects from fucking anything. If I eat too much salt, if I drink too much wine, I'm fucked.
Sugar.
Breathe too much air.
Mr. Sabaf was asked, why can't we just deschedule cannabis? He said, well look, we haven't done enough pharmaceutical testing. And I thought, hang around. There are currently pharmaceuticals on the market that weren't even thought of 10 years ago. We've been using cannabis for thousands of years. Currently, there are 38 states in the US where medicinal cannabis is legal, 24 where recreational cannabis is legal. And what's been the outcome? What has been the added harm? Nothing. No one's been harmed. What are the dangers they're protecting us from? What is the utility of these laws? We have to start with a relative harms assessment. Are these ideas that we're canvassing fit for purpose? Do we need to protect people in Australia against cannabis?
No.
I see the outcomes of these laws. I'm getting head up. Excuse me. I don't normally need a microphone.
Don't throw your voice out, James. You got another one this afternoon.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yes, I'm here.
I'll help if you want.
I see the results of these laws. I come into the cannabis law reform movement as, first of all, I was a skid row drunk when I was young. Primary alcoholic, they call it. I was taken by my family in a car and dropped off on a street corner in Sydney at age 16 and told to go away. Right? I was totally out of control. I was a danger to myself and everyone around me. I was a chronic alcoholic. Now, it took me until I was 26 to get over it. That's a whole other story. Right? But I've used cannabis as a crux ever since. I don't seem to have the same trouble there. Right? But along the way, at age 21, I came home from work and found a house full of policemen and a whole heap of artefacts I'd never seen before, and conversation about chemist busts, etc., etc. And then a policeman ran in from the backyard with a little punnet with 3 cannabis plants this big. I was promptly locked up in Newcastle over the weekend, fronted the police on Monday morning. They decided, we're talking a long time ago, 40 plus years ago, and the magistrate said, well, you can pay $700 an inch for those, and you have 2 days to pay, which effectively meant that I spent 45 days in Silverwater paying off 3 plants this big. In those days, it was in those days the cultivation of Indian hemp. Now, I walked out of Silverwater Penitentiary, caught a train across town to the Seaforth office of Normal, and Dr. Kerr, and I was one of the young idiots running around with the pads, taking all sorts of petition after petition after petition, 2 SM concerts and everything. Right, I was one of the...
I'd have to know you from there.
Yeah, I was just one of the foot soldiers. Now, I have to point out that back then, the laws regarding cannabis in New South Wales were more liberal than they are today. We seem to kid ourselves that we've had this generative process where we've been chipping away at it. That's utter bullshit. The cannabis law reform effort in Australia has been moved forward vicariously by what's happening overseas, but of our own effort here in Australia, fuck all. We really haven't achieved anything. How do I know this? I've got a doctorate in law. That's a whole other story. Right? A bit of a pushback. I spend lots of time helping people who are suffering from the current laws. People who are busted for daring to supply the cannabis that you and I are smoking all the time. And still, in the courts, we talk this language about protecting the society from harm. The harm that pot dealers are causing, that they're predatory people who are running around addicting our youth. What rot! I am sick of the whole of the cannabis law reform debate being full of bullshit. Cannabis does not harm people. You don't need to lock a crop of cannabis behind barbed wire. It's fucking ridiculous. What's the worst possible outcome? I went to a Senate committee here in Macquarie Street a few years ago, and I commenced by pointing out in Nimbin we have a town hall that's only a stone's throw from a pub. If you open the town hall, put a sign out the front and said as much cannabis as you want to eat, and put a ton of cannabis, high quality cannabis, in the middle of the room, there'd be a few sick people. You'd have a few greenouts about the place, but there would be no lasting harm. I can guarantee that. How do I know? The lived experience of hundreds of millions of people over generations. You fuckwits.
Yes.
Whereas, just up the road at the pub, I put a sign out, as much alcohol as you can drink, free. And there are dead people. There is serious harm. There's major chaos and disruption, invariably. I'm not in favour of making alcohol illegal. I'm in favour of stop talking bullshit.
Good luck, James. Yes.
Now I invited John here because John Reeves was one of the primary movers in the old marijuana party.
A&P, 1979.
I dug him out of his burrow when we were putting together the hemp party ages ago. Right now he's sort of the roaming ambassador / lobbyist for cannabis law reform. He's been visiting virtually every politician who might have a say in Australia and nattering in their ear, which I suggest can only be a good thing.
Yep, I can do this.
Thank you, James.
Now, I just want to start, right, having had my whoa. All of this informs my approach to cannabis law reform. First of all, what is cannabis law reform? Mostly it's a lot of bullshit. It's a lot of double speak happening in political forums where people aren't really saying what they mean. The cannabis law reform I'm talking about will take arbitrary powers out of the hands of police. The cannabis law reform that I'm interested in will allow people to grow a bit of cannabis without the copper staring down their fucking neck every minute. Right? Let's face it. The cannabis law reform I'm interested in is not necessarily entirely legal. What is warranted and needed desperately in Australia, as with everywhere else in this space, is just some plain talk and acknowledgement that half of the old drug war rhetoric which still reigns is just simply bullshit. It's all lies. Cannabis is not a harmful drug. It's relatively harmless. It's not entirely harmless, but every other pharmaceutical product readily available is more harmful. Just look at the statistics. Last year, 209 people had recorded on their death certificate that they died from analgesic abuse. I mean, a similar quantity of people die directly from aspirin abuse. right? These things are available over the counter in an unrestricted fashion. Now, I'm not arguing that they shouldn't be. I'm just pointing out that no drug dealer selling just cannabis is responsible for any harm. What's more, he's got you and you stoned, which is what we want. Look, all of this stupid, hypocritical tap dancing around it, I like to get stoned. I want cannabis legal because I like getting stoned. I like smoking a big bomb in the morning. If you don't like it, then fuck off. You're not invited. But don't get in my face. Now,
Round of applause for Jim, please. Come on, well done, folks.
now, with all of that being said, that informs my approach to cannabis law reform. I'm currently sitting on a little group which is developing policy proposals for the hemp party. Now, the problem that I have is that what we're doing is we're developing a whole heap of the best possible outcomes that we really want in a wonderful world, which will never be implemented. This is never going to happen. I spent years looking at the way that it has developed to a reasonable situation in other jurisdictions. It happens incrementally, bit by bit, generally despite what the people at the top want, right? People are provided an inch and they take that mile by working at it. Our job is to push this process along, not to argue for the best, but to argue for the poor bugger who's getting hassled by the cops right now. To argue that we need to be able to carry with us the same amount of cannabis in our pocket as you can get on prescription. Why is it that a piece of paper by a doctor suddenly turns my cannabis from a dangerous substance into a therapeutic good?
It's natural. It's natural.
Why? Because we don't talk about this in real terms. We talk about it in mythical terms, as if all of this is actually protecting someone from some harm. No, it's paying a lot of police officers to buy a second house. It's paying a lot of politicians to sit in talk fests. What you end up with, because we've talked bullshit about this for so long, is people happily telling you one thing and doing another every time. When I illustrated it with the Biden example, let's come home to New South Wales. When I was 17 and a half, the LNP, well, the Liberal government, Liberal Country Party coalition, made it possible for me as a juvenile to walk around Sydney with an ounce in my pocket and only get a caution. So we've got to stop congratulating ourselves. We've gone fucking backwards. All around the world, they're happily being hypocrites. In America, there's no such a thing as fully legal cannabis. It's still federally illegal. But they're functional hypocrites. As I say, at the next election, 9 more states, it'll either become legal or decriminalised. Currently, 68% of the American population have access to free weed. And we can't do it here according to our government because it'll be against international protocols. Or any number of 1,000 other bullshit proposals that doesn't stop a government doing what it wants when it wants to. So, number 1, my first and ongoing rule for cannabis law reform is tolerate no bullshit. The constant talk about cannabis being a dangerous substance. When someone proposes a law, move back and say, well, why are you proposing this law? What harm might come to someone if this law wasn't there? Right now, if we removed every law regarding cannabis, in Australia, there would be no physical injuries occasioned, and there'd be a shitload of people better off. Our laws aren't doing anything, but we still sit around in forums all the time discussing the best options available without belling the cat. You are talking bullshit, Mr. Politician. Come down to earth. How many of you people have suffered a serious injury from cannabis? How many people have got a friend in the family who suffered a serious injury from cannabis? Now substitute alcohol for that word. Virtually every Australian citizen. Now, with alcohol, we've gone tragically in the opposite direction, right? Rather than undertaking a relative harms assessment and crafting appropriate laws, we've gifted the laws to the corporate sector. In the US, they're compounding their hypocrisy by doing much the same. It means that looking to the US for guidance is a bit difficult. The way that they achieved it in the United States was pretty much by exploiting a gap at the federal, and so the federal government made medicinal cannabis legal, right? And in the late 90s in California, a few groups of people gathered together in buyers clubs and then had an in-house dispensary. That's where the word comes from. Now, the in-house dispensary then provided to all of those members of the buyers club medicinal cannabis. This was right in the middle of the AIDS epidemic, so it was topical, all right? Proposal 215 was then crafted to fill that gap. It was a beautifully crafted piece of legislation which was the first instance of a medicinal cannabis card. Now, the person who put it together was very cluey. He decided, well, look, we're never going to change them from being hypocrites, so we'll just change the law in a way that we can use it. So, we want medicinal cannabis, and what we'll do is we'll issue a card to everyone who's 18 and eligible, and we'll make virtually anything treatable by cannabis. If you're having difficulty in burping, you will get a card. And his theory was that, well, when the line between recreational and medicinal disappears, all cannabis is medicinal. Use the current system. He was a sensible person who pushed the law forward by organising and exploiting. Right? We're not going to win the battle by changing these politicians' minds. They're hypocritical assholes, the majority of them. Right? There are some who are nice, there are some who genuinely, but they're in such a tiny minority, right? They really don't have any grasp on the dialogue that's happening, on the conversation. We live in a land where the conversation is run by Murdoch, by the commercial papers. And in the Murdoch press, cannabis is a dangerous drug that will kill your children. It'll turn them into atheistic, leftist, woke people, right, who probably, I don't know, want to go and fight for Hamas. It's just, it really is that far off planet Earth, right? Now, our job as cannabis law reformers is to, I suggest, make life better for the people who are consuming cannabis. Not necessarily craft the best possible laws.
Put pressure on the politicians so that they can't help but come along with these sensible ideas that we're putting forth.
I have no faith in politicians. I have no faith in the political systems at all. At all. They have utterly deserted me my whole life. I have never smoked cannabis in Australia legally. I've never had a prescription because I'm not a hypocrite. I'm not sick. I like to get stoned.
Yay!
And I'm not going to walk into a doctor and lie just to get some cannabis. I'll grow it myself illegally. Fuck you!
Yay!
But, sorry, it's a sore point.
James.
I'm now in my 60s. I've never smoked cannabis legally in Australia. About a year ago, I was lying in a park in Asia, stoned as a mongrel. Wonderful day. Late in the evening. Whack! I dozed off. Oh, I came to, and there was 2 coppers standing there. And my heart went straight up my throat. I thought, fuck. And then suddenly I realised I'm in Thailand. The park was closing. Please, sir, will you take your bong with you? Here you are. Oh, I dream of that in Australia. Our policemen aren't interested in our good health. So I spent a lot of my life going around Australia teaching activists how to deal with coppers. What to do when you get arrested, how to be arrested. If you go online, there's on YouTube, there's a channel called FU Legal, right? Fringe University Legal. There's summaries of the basis of that workshop there.
Oh, you.
Now, these are tips about being a cannabis user in our society. This informs my cannabis law reform, right? What is actually happening to people and how people can avoid the worst legal outcomes, right? When you are dealing with a policeman and you don't smoke cannabis, then yes, Mr. Policeman may be your friend. But if you smoke cannabis, Mr. Policeman isn't your friend. He just wants to bang you up. So there's some basic, simple rules, which I'll just run through. Avoid the coppers. Don't become friends with the coppers. Don't get to know a policeman's name. Right? As soon as you get to know a policeman, you become one of the usual suspects. You become a topical person. Just be very formal with them. Avoid the police if you can. Rule number 1, avoid them. The best way to not have a hassle with the coppers is to not run into the coppers. I got up at 4:20 to come in here today. Right? I got here before light because I don't want hassles with the coppers. So you plan and avoid the coppers. When you do run into the coppers, there are 2 questions that I'm often asked. What do I have to tell the coppers? Which is beside the point. What should I tell the coppers? You provide an answer for whatever they ask. You're very, very polite, you're thick, and you know nothing. Simple as that. You do have to tell them your name, your address, your telephone number, etc. But, so what? You're not terrorists. But everything else, you just don't have a clue. You don't even really understand the question. Being an idiot is not against the law. And it's the best defence against a copper. Just be a total twit. Then, it's not going to work. You've got a kilo of cannabis on the front seat next to you. Mr. Plod puts his hand on your shoulder and says, "You are under arrest." What do? Simple. You shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. I want you to remember that. Someone here will be arrested in the next year. someone in this tent will be arrested for cannabis in the next year. And I want you to remember, when they put that hand on your shoulder, all other thoughts will flee. You'll be freaked the fuck out. You won't know which way is up. But I want you to just remember that simple doctrine. When under arrest, shut the fuck up. What the police will do is they'll put their hand on your shoulder and they will say to you, you're under arrest. You have a right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be taken down and may be used in evidence in a court of law against you. Do you understand? You go, oh, and forget it what? You have a right to remain silent. This is the golden thread that runs through English jurisprudence. Right? We don't have much else, but you don't have to talk to the coppers. You don't have to say anything. When you go into a police station, they'll ignore that. They'll spend every moment that they can being buddy, talking to you. Just say nothing. Be quiet. When asked a question, say no comment. They'll lead you into an interview room, sit you down, start writing on a blue sheet. Any question asked, say, this legal advisor in a tent told me to shut the fuck up. And so I have no comment. And you will repeat no comment until you lose your voice or they stop asking. Then at the end of it, they'll slide the blue sheet across and say, sign here. And you won't sign anything in that interview room. Do not sign anything in an interview room. You'll walk out, sign the chit for your possessions, maybe self-recognizance bail, go home, and that will mean you're in a situation where someone who has legal knowledge can help you. Here's a stat that you probably need to know. More than 80% of cannabis convictions, lower order cannabis convictions, in New South Wales are achieved entirely on a self-signed statement of interview. The coppers slid a gun across the table to you and you shot yourself in the head just through lack of knowledge. But now you know. Now, what is all of this? This is all arming you against a police force that is seeking to incarcerate you for no good reason. I'm happy to teach people how to break the law because the law is an arse. Not all laws. I don't advocate anarchy. But in this instance, it seems impossible for law reform, right, the law reformers, the dialogue at the political level, to actually come to grips with reality and shed all the bullshit. So, I'm going to sit back here and invite anyone with questions or a statement or an observation about anything I've said to chip in. And I promised you that I had no answers, and I haven't provided any. But hopefully I've provided some foundation for a conversation that's real about cannabis, rather than the bullshit you constantly hear talk. Thank you.
Hey!
And I've got a microphone here, so if you want to say something, please put your hand up so we can get it on the camera, get the recording.
Now, the main reason I asked John to come along is he really does know and has met virtually every one of the principal politicians engaged in lobby for cannabis law reform, and many who are lobbying against. So he has first-hand knowledge of these people. I've met quite a few of them, but I'm nowhere near as tolerant.
It's not, it's true. It's hard.
So, can I just open up by saying thank you for everything that you've been doing for the last 40 or 50 years or however long it's been, because we're in the position that we're in today only because of the work that people like yourself and others have actually done. So I want to start just by saying thank you. And I want to follow it on by what we're trying to do now is to take what you've done and give it a new shot in the arm and put into play something that makes it difficult and scary for the politicians to actually ignore what we're doing. Yes, interacting with them, all of that stuff, it's all bullshit, right? We all know that. But it's a game. And for us to be successful in that game, we've got to play it in a way where we can think about actually being strategically successful, changing the system. That's another story. So what we're trying to engineer is a situation where there will be a cannabis vote. And look, you know, Michael Balderstone, David Edishank, Brian Walker, all those people in Parliament, props to them. They've done amazing work. They're trailblazers and they're fighting from the inside. And what we're trying to set up is something on the outside, taking regulations from informed people like yourself who have lived experience and actually understand what the problem is, and help put that together in a way where we have the major parties in this country competing for who will be the most pro-cannabis, because there will be a political cost to people actually not coming along and supporting common sense regulations put into place and supported by not just this amazing crowd here in Nimbin, which is amazing. I've got to tell you, it's my first MardiGrass. It's absolutely incredible here. But putting it together in a way where we're bringing, you know, the lawyers sitting in the CBD in Melbourne and Sydney and all the rest of them, with doctors, with electricians, with plumbers, with all these people out there that so many of them are already using cannabis. They don't know how to get behind this effort to change the laws to be common sense. So,
Is that a question?
there was a comment.
Okay, you raised a couple of points here, just let me have a couple of points here. Public vote, okay? Last federal election, the Legalise Cannabis Party got 500,000 votes on the record. That's a pretty serious mandate. It doesn't translate to anything because the other parties still ignore it, but it did fire the Greens up in terms of putting the current federal bill and federal inquiry that's been in place this year. They said specifically that's what fired them up. So that's worked to that point. Unfortunately, that committee has 3 Labor on it, 2 Greens and 1 Liberal or something, and it's in balance. So Labor's going to have the call on the vote. It's not looking they'll do anything, but if anyone wants to do anything, harass the fuck out of Labor. Right now, the report's due in 3 weeks. There's near agreements, the Labor on the committee. They need to know what people think. Second one is currently in Western Australia. Sophia Lalonde, who's around here somewhere, the Legalise Cannabis member there, has put a bill forward in the Western Australian Parliament for a referendum, like a plebiscite at the state level. Yeah, this is interesting. It's very short. It's one of the best bills I've seen so far. It's about 2 lines. It's fucking brilliant. And the problem is getting enough of a public kind of campaign behind it to convince the Parliament to take that risk and actually put it to a public vote. The costings will be quite low because it's going at the same time as the next election, so it's added to the ballot. It's not a separate thing like on the federal level. The main problem is Quigley, who's the Attorney General over there. He's one of these, oh yes, it'll be really good, but no, we're not going to do anything kind of people. So that's what's happening at the moment. I agree with you entirely. A public vote would be fantastic of any kind, really. But a state plebiscite would be particularly useful in the sense that it's not legally binding. You know, you're going to get radical from it, but it's loose enough so that if you got 30 or 40% of the vote, you could have a strong case. You know, I don't think the public in Australia's had a chance to vote formally on the record. They vote for the head party, the Legalise Cannabis Party at the federal level, and that's been increasing. It will increase next time, but it's not tied to anything. So this is a good move, and we should be convincing other states to try and take the same move in the next elections.
And I'm not too sure about, whilst you seem to have great faith in the Australian character, following the voice referendum,
I don't.
I'm
I'm
somewhat worried about the proposition of a plebiscite in the Australian media environment where the media environment is a choice between far right and far right.
Okay. What are your worries? What do you think would be the worry? You think the issue would get lost?
Yeah, the issue would get lost in a
and
scare
become
campaign majored in the Murdoch press, which will have every teenage child tragically heroin addicted terrorist. You know,
I mean, naked cannabis users storming the streets.
yeah, that's it.
At
You
night.
know. It's,
Well, you don't draw all this kind of shit out. It's like having a wound that's gone pustulant. You
Because
have to
some-
kind of squeeze the pus.
I just
You know?
really don't have faith
In the system.
in the system. I feel that we've just got to push and push and push and take the incremental bits that we can until eventually most of the arseholes die.
Generational change, James. So you're suggesting
Oh,
that
yes,
you should
you
be
can
patient.
say generational change, but I prefer to point out that they're arseholes and it'll be good to see them
So you're
back.
suggesting that we should be patient and wait for generational change. The state government allows for a plebiscite, but I don't think there's been used for cannabis yet.
They've got a question up.
Oh, okay.
Sorry,
What's your name? Oh, Will, shut up. There you go. Off you go.
My name's Jules.
Jules, hi Jules.
Well, I don't think we need to worry too much because we've already got medicinal cannabis and most people can actually get access to it, and that's going to be, I don't think the issue really now is the legalisation of the access to cannabis. I think that's great that we've really made headways there. I think the main issue that we face is the driving laws. And this is what we're all very concerned about now. And so my question is, what will the argument most likely go toward? That cannabis is out of step with other pharmaceuticals, the driving laws is out of step, so cannabis is the only pharmaceutical that stands apart from the laws around the other ones? Or will they go the other way and toughen up more on other pharmaceuticals?
Well, it's a good question to address because it illustrates so clearly how we tend to treat cannabis in a distinctive fashion, in a different fashion to any other substance. Yes, they do use saliva testing in other overseas jurisdictions. In Australia, every year, just in Australia, we conduct 5 times as many cannabis tests as all of the other overseas jurisdictions combined. We're utterly obsessed with it. Again, I started the conversation with the need to go back to the basics. What harm are they pretending to protect us from? Now,
Ourselves.
I do agree that if someone is impaired by their use of cannabis, they shouldn't be driving. Right? I think everyone...
Self-regulating.
Right? But cannabis users are very rarely impaired, functionally impaired. It's a mythology which has been constructed by straight people who drink alcohol. They don't understand.
So what is the test for impairment? If we have a test of impairment,
In
what do we
the-
do with alcohol?
Police discretionary powers at the moment.
In the United States, they've addressed this in California in 20 years of different iterations of the law. Originally, it was just outlawed, as it is in Australia, trace amounts. Yeah. Then, once they moved to a point where there were finer detail on that, no, you had to display presence and impairment. Then they scripted in close detail an impairment test. They went backwards and forwards. Currently, in each one of the police details, there's one officer who's qualified as an impairment tester, right? And when someone is considered may be impaired by cannabis, they whip the impairment tester out to site and he'll conduct an impairment test.
What does that consist of, James? Do you know what the test consists of? Can you give us a demonstration?
Have to walk straight on.
Yeah, there's physical and cognitive aspects in it.
You have to recite the national anthem
Yes.
without mumbling.
There's 23 elements in the test. But in the end, right, it's a much better system for all the silliness than a system which just says brutal outlawing. Because currently, we have more than 1 million people in Australia who are receiving medicinal cannabis in a hypocritical fashion, more than half of them from a chemist. Right?
Some of us are legitimate, James.
Oh, some of
Got
them,
to-
oh, sorry.
Confirmed by medical specialists.
Right, yes, but
It's good being legal, there's nothing wrong with it, it's just a limited situation for all the people in there.
yeah, but
That's the look, see?
this is creating huge difficulty for our courts. Because the courts,
It is.
the magistracy are really obliged to consider not only the public interest, but fairness, right? And a great many instances they're providing Section 10 dispensation on the basis that pursuing something is no longer in the public interest. They can only do it one per person. You only get one Section 10, right? The number of these that have gone have skyrocketed simply because the magistracy recognise that our driving laws are ridiculously harsh when it comes to cannabis. So I don't have any magical answer there, but I would suggest, as I suggested right at the beginning, the most important repair that we can do for matters such as that is to repair the conversation, the social conversation. Be utterly intolerant of bullshit. Cannabis is not dangerous. There is no such a thing as a huge amount of people who are dying every year from hopping into cars and killing themselves when impaired just from cannabis. It doesn't happen, and when a politician either asserts or infers that it does, they have to be pulled up and say, all right, we can stop testing for cannabis right now, and the likely negative outcome will be nil.
Right, hey, good.
So why are we so outdated now on that cannabis reform? Why are we going backwards when, like Holland and places like that, got it so right, so
It's
wrong?
purely the politicians, and you get a
Why are the
politician.
politicians all
Well, you
you
have to go ask them themselves.
We're not
But,
getting
but in somewhere like Canberra, you had Barr, who's the chief minister, who pushed that forward. And we literally just did not have, especially the current government, Labor Party, who were behind it. It's that simple, you know. There's the Greens in Parliament, there's independent members, there's members of the Labor Party who would want it legal, you know. But it's that political powers are going to vote in the House.
I spend most of my time focusing on the damage caused by our cannabis laws and on the individuals who are currently, like, we seem to have this myth that everyone who wants it can get it. As long as the police have discretion. There is a cadre of people in Australia who are constantly hassled by the coppers, who have their life turned upside down every second Thursday, right? Who have the coppers on their back constantly because they dare to use cannabis. And these are normally marginalised people, people of colour, racial minorities, people who are economically
Disabled.
disadvantaged. The people who can get cannabis and use cannabis freely in Australia are white middle class people like you and me. We can do it freely with no difficulty whatsoever. But as long as and I see it, there are people in jail right now. I've got one friend who's now been for daring to sell a bit of cannabis and then protest that it actually, you know, you've got it all ballsed up, I'm innocent. He's now been reporting daily to the police station for 15 months. Right? Because otherwise he might dangerously go out into the community and provide cannabis to someone. Oh well, that's a good thing I'm allowed.
That's okay. Hey, Jules, where's Jules?
Can we put on the question up here? Might just have to shower now.
Shower now for a come down and have a talk about your questions.
I've been hearing this conversation now for a very long time.
Good idea. Have a seat. Okay, that's a charge sheet. Last week.
I've been enjoying
I
Cannabis.
got arrested. And I've got a legal script. Okay. We got a podcast coming up in September.
It seems to be kind of
I've been in the grounds and said we should get charged to accept.
Annually,
Until then, the license is suspended. I don't worry about it. I'm just trying to avoid them.
I pulled over and somebody gave me a little bit of oil, so I can't smoke anymore. But I still like to get stoned.
Yeah.
So I thought I'll take it orally. So somebody gave me a bit of oil. I thought I'll have a little taste. Put on my tongue, gives me anything on it. I'll go and have coffee, enjoy myself during the day. I'm driving home. So I'm being pulled over by the breathalyzer, as we call it these days. And of course, the first thing is, happens to me all the time, this. I'm not thinking anything of it. Yeah, sure, right. I lift this thing, give it to him, and I wait, and I wait, and I wait. Why does this take so long? Anyway, in the end, it turns out that I'm sitting him shaking this thing, carrying on. What the hell's going on? It's never happened. Anyway, finally comes over to me and says, well, I don't know what's happening, he said, but kind of started a little bit of a red line of some sort. And you had to drive me 30 kilometres away to do the other test.
Yeah.
So I said, mate, I don't know what's going on. There's probably something wrong with your testing. All I'm trying to make is I almost went up in some sort of situation. And all I had was this tiny little drop of oil on my tongue. Let alone being there with all the other rest of it that goes on. And, it's getting a little bit now kind of frustrating and annoying more to the point. The point you made that I'd like got to change the social conversation. And I think the conversation now should be around legalising, don't legalise, do this, do that. Now, why don't we start concentrating about two things? Change the conversation. I really need it. That's going to be a pretty difficult task. And the other one is that I'd like to know is what the hell goes on in politics tonight. You're an educated man, a legal man. I want to peer into your brain, your brain, and say, what's the obstinate reluctance?
Because I listen to GP.
Well, they can read that. The political class in Australia is stuck between a rock and a hard place. Right? On the one side, you've got the vast majority of the Australian population are in favour of, if not decriminalisation, then certainly reducing the penalties associated with cannabis. On the other side of the conversation, you've got all of the commercial and political class and the media. In Australia, the biggest problem that we have is a commercial far-right media, right? I agree, it's very, very difficult to change the conversation, but that's where the nuts of the problem lies.
How's back on, James?
On that note, we will have to wrap up. Thank you very much, Jim, for a very passionate
Thank you, everyone.
presentation. You're
It'll be
obviously
with you
a
soon.
fantastic advocate for drug law reform. And this is what this weekend